Greetings from Columbia Business School, Executive Education. My name is Scott Gardner, and I'm here today with Professor Ann Bartel for today's webinar, The Future of Work in the Post-COVID Era. Before I introduce Ann, I'd like to just go over a few quick logistics. As you'll see on your screen right now, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you. If you'd like to tweet about this webinar, please do so at #CBSExecEd. Finally, most importantly, please submit those questions to the Q&A box. Ann and I will get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. It's my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Professor Ann Bartel. She is the Merrill Lynch Professor of Workforce Transformation at Columbia Business School and is an expert in the fields of labor economics and human resource management. She has served as a consultant for many companies on strategic human resource management issues, presented numerous workshops on negotiation skills, and directed many of Columbia's custom executive education programs. Her research has been published in top economic journals, and she is currently studying the impact of paid family leave policies on employee turnover and productivity and infant and maternal health. Ann, it's great to be with you today. So nice to see you.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Great. Welcome. I will leave the stage. I will rejoin you in the last 10 minutes for the Q&A. Have a great session.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. So we have 20 minutes to cover a very interesting topic. I hope to get to most issues, and I know you have many questions you want to ask. So we'll be handling that at the end of the session. What I hope to cover in 20 minutes is giving you some data on the prevalence of remote work. What was it like before COVID? What was it during COVID? What is it like to be after COVID? What types of jobs can be done remotely? What do employees think about remote work? And what should employers be thinking about in terms of the pros and cons of remote work? Let's start with some data. So this chart is based on a survey that was done over the time period May 2020 to November 2020, the early stages of the COVID pandemic, and then as we began to come out of the pandemic. And what this shows is prior to COVID, if you go back to 2017, 2018, only 5% of paid days were worked from home. So that's kind of like a benchmark. What was things like before COVID? In the height of COVID, 60% of paid days were worked from home. And over the course of the next 6 months, that fell to about 40% in November of 2020. Now in this survey, which was conducted by some faculty at University of Chicago, one of the questions they asked is, after COVID, in 2022 and later, how often is your employer planning for you to work full days at home? And you can see here the number is 20%, a lot higher than it was back in the days of pre-COVID. So one of the interesting questions is, can all jobs be performed at home? How could you figure out what types of jobs can be performed at home? What types of jobs need to be done in person? So this is based on some data that the US Department of Labor collects, where they characterize and describe the attributes of different jobs. And jobs are characterized based on whether you work directly with the public, whether you use machinery, perform physical activities, whether you use email frequently, whether you're exposed to diseases or infection. And these researchers, publishing in the Journal of Public Economics in December 2020, made the determination that the jobs I have listed here, the attributes listed here, would be examples of jobs that cannot be performed at home. And then applying this rubric to the jobs that are in the United States, they calculated that 37% of jobs in the United States can be performed at home. Now, what's interesting, I'll get in the next slide, show you the significant variation across occupations and industries. But before even looking at that, what's interesting is to consider what their data imply for other countries besides the United States. And the significant finding is there's tremendous variation across countries. So just some examples. Lower income countries have lower shares. 25% of jobs in Mexico can be performed at home compared to 42% in the UK. So when we say 37% for the United States, you want to bear in mind there's significant cross-country variation. This slide shows you the variation across occupations. I don't think it's anything surprising here. Let me just point out the numbers that you see in parentheses are just the codes that the U.S. Department of Labor assigns to different categories. They don't mean anything other than codes. What you want to look at is on the x-axis, this is share of jobs that could be done at home. On the y-axis, the median hourly wage. And notice up in the top right corner, it says management. Management jobs, they calculated that about 85 to 90% of those jobs can be done at home. Contrasting that with something like healthcare, where healthcare practitioners, only about 5 to 10% of those jobs can be performed at home. So this just gives you a sense of the significant variation across the labor force, depending on the nature of the job, whether it can be performed at home. So this is variation across occupations. Management scores very high, business finance scores very high, legal, computing, mathematical, and education. And this shows you by industry, and it's very kind of similar patterns to what we saw on the previous slide. So management of companies and enterprises, 79% of those jobs can be performed at home. Contrast that with, look at the bottom of the slide, retail trade, only 14% can be performed at home. So back to this University of Chicago survey, an interesting question was asked. In 2022 and later, in other words, after COVID, how often would you like to have paid work days at home? So this is among people who can work from home, reflecting on what we just looked at. How often do you want to have paid work days at home? And look what jumps off the page here. People really want to work from home. 15%, 2 days per week. 14%, 3 days per week. 7%, 4 days per week. And 27% every day, 5 days per week. So this shows this is extremely popular, that people do want to work from home. And this has significant implications for HR professionals, for managers in terms of attracting and retaining talent. Now, what this slide shows you is that you might wonder, well, based on the previous slide, what about people in different parts of the wage distribution? Maybe people who are at the low end of the wage distribution don't want to work from home. People at the high end of the wage distribution do want to work from home. And what this next slide shows you, looking at the black circles, it's pretty uniform. Ask the question, how often would you like to have paid work days at home? It really doesn't make a difference whether you're earning $20,000 a year or $250,000 a year. There's a uniform desire to work from home. But employers have different plans. And notice that huge gap between employee desires and employer plans at the lower end of the wage distribution and much greater alignment at the top. So again, there's some societal issues here in terms of people who will have the opportunity to work from home and those who won't. So the question is, what we saw from the previous slide that said employees want to work from home. The question is why? And what the research shows and what surveys show is a number of reasons. People really like not commuting. People want to live where they want to live. They'd like to not necessarily work in live and work in a central business district. They want to work away from a central business district. They want to be able to be at home with their families. Dual career issues. Many companies will tell you that employees that have dual career issues find the remote work setup very appealing. Work-life balance, especially for people who have children, people who are caring for elderly parents. This enables them to have work-life balance. And immigration issues. Many companies struggle with, are my employees going to get the visas they need to come work in the United States? Well, if you can work from anywhere, you don't need to worry about visas. So that's why employees are very positive about working from home. Now, I want to kind of set this into context. Everything I've presented to you so far is very recent, specific to COVID situation. But the question is, what do employees generally value in addition to compensation? So this is based on some surveys that were done, one that was done in 2009, one in 2019, asking people, what types of rewards do you find as important as compensation? So just for benchmarking purposes, we're going to look at the column on the left and the column in the middle. This is data collected in 2009. And people were asked to select among different attributes of a job in addition to compensation. So baby boomers, people born between 1946 and 1964, responded in 2009 that flexible work arrangements was number 4 on their list. Gen Y millennials responded into that survey that flexible work arrangements was number 2 on their list. Now look at Gen Z, the most recent entrance to the labor force. This was a survey done in 2019. And look what's at the top of the list: flexible work arrangements, just as important as compensation. So what this is saying is that pre-COVID, there was a strong desire to have flexible work arrangements. Now, what does flexible work arrangements mean? It could mean working when you want to work, where you want to work, how you're going to work, who you're going to be interacting with. But Gen Z strongly values flexibility. So this is very consistent with how people are responding to their perceptions of what remote work was like for them in 2020, what they're hoping it'll be going forward. So back to the survey that was done in 2020. And notice the title of my slide: working from home is a valuable perk. So here's a question that was asked. After COVID in 2022 and later, how would you feel about working from home 2 or 3 days a week? Positive, I would view it as a benefit or extra pay. Neutral or negative. Then if you responded positive or negative, how much of a pay raise or cut as a percentage of your current pay would you value as much as the option to work from home 2 or 3 days a week? I find this slide fascinating. Notice what it tells you. Only maybe 7% view it as negative, 28% view it as neutral, and the strong majority say this is a positive. This makes my job more attractive. It'd be equivalent to, in some cases, a more than 25% raise, a 15 to 25% raise, or something a little less than 15%. So again, I see significant implications here for HR professionals in terms of how do I attract employees to my company? How do I attract? How do I retain? This is saying that flexibility is a key motivator. The working from home experience in 2020 has exceeded expectations. So employees were asked, compared to your expectations before COVID, how has working from home turned out for you? Usually better, substantially better, about the same, worse, substantially worse, or hugely worse. Notice what people are saying. They are more productive working remotely than they were before. Only 13% say it's worse. 26% say it's about the same. And the strong majority says, much better. I am more productive than I expected. So the question is, from the perspective of companies, what are the potential benefits of working from home? So I've already showed you that people strongly value flexibility. They're willing to take a pay cut in exchange for more flexibility. They put tremendous premium on having flexibility. What this suggests is that companies can use what I'm calling an efficiency wage approach, which means that they can create a package of rewards, not necessarily monetary, but it could be other benefits as well. In this case, flexibility to work from anywhere. And this will increase employee engagement and reduce attrition. Now, the little picture I have off on the right here, it's a picture of Henry Ford, who's considered the first person to have tried to use an efficiency wage approach when he doubled pay of his auto employees. Not because he had to, because he recognized if I pay them more, they're going to be more engaged, they're going to stay with my company. So I think that's the major takeaway for companies reflecting on, we've seen what employees really value. Let's use that to design a package of rewards that will attract and retain. Another possible benefit is less sick leave. If people are sick, not violently sick, but moderately sick, sick enough that they can't go to the office, but they still can work from home. Now, the question is, can employees be more productive? I'll show you in a minute how you might figure out how to calculate that. But at least employees feel, based on the survey results, that they are more productive. It reduces real estate costs. It expands the talent pool. I'm located in a particular city. I don't need to just restrict my talent search to that city. I can get the best talent from anywhere in the world. So back on this survey, people were asked, how does your efficiency working from home during the pandemic compare to your efficiency working on business premises before the pandemic? And again, people feel they are much more efficient, substantially more efficient, maybe about the same, but very few people say less efficient. So this is from the perspective of the employee saying, I am more efficient, perhaps the same, but I'm certainly not less efficient. So I know some of you asked a question about how do you actually go about measuring the impact of working from home on productivity? There seems to be some debate. Employees think they're more productive, employers aren't sure. How would you actually measure that? How would you actually prove whether or not there is a positive or a negative impact of working from home on productivity? So ideally, to do this correctly and to come up with numbers that you feel you can rely on, that you can use to set policy for your company, ideally you want to conduct an experiment. So let me give you an example of what I think is probably the best one out there. This is pre-COVID. This was done back in 2015, but the research design is the cleanest I have seen, and one you might want to think about if your company is contemplating a working from home policy. How could you measure the impact of that program? So this is an experiment that was done at Ctrip, which is a very large Chinese travel agency. And they were trying to figure out how to reduce attrition and maintain productivity for their call center employees, because attrition was a big problem for them. So they asked people, would you want to participate in this experiment? And if you said, yes, I'll participate, then you were randomly assigned to either work from home or in the office for 9 months. The key thing here is the random assignment. They did not ask people, raise your hands if you want to work from home. This was, raise your hand if you want to be in the experiment. We're going to randomly assign you to work from home or working in the office. And that's the key point. Anytime you want to do a study of, does working from home work? Does it in fact increase productivity? You need to make sure you don't have what economists call selection bias, that the people who know they're going to do well working from home sign up for it. In this particular study, they found performance of at-home workers increased by 13%. People were these travel agents were logged on for more minutes. They took more calls per minute. The attrition rate went down. People were really happy doing this, and they were more likely to stay with the company. So I think one thing we want to think about is, why did this work in this setting? What is it about the call center job that lends itself nicely to working from home that may not be appropriate for other types of jobs? But I do want to emphasize the research design. If you really want to get a clean estimate of the impact, it's got to be a random experiment. Now, recognizing, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, the challenges that organizations face. Employees are very happy working from home. Most employees are very happy working from home. It appears to increase engagement, but there are these issues. The kind of informal socialization and mentoring that takes place in the office, the informal brainstorming that takes place, the informal knowledge sharing. How do you evaluate performance of someone who's working from home compared to someone doing the same job in person? Is there potential biases in the way these performance evaluations might be done? Compensation. Do you pay based on the cost of living, or do you pay based on the job? Data security issues. All of these are major challenges that companies are thinking about today. So what I hope you could take away from this brief presentation, and we'll try to flesh this out in the Q&A, my takeaway is working from anywhere, WFA, not working from home, working from anywhere, is likely to stick for some occupations. Employees generally view it as a valuable perk. I think companies need to try to assess the impact of WFA on performance, recognizing how challenging it is to avoid selection bias. Thinking about some of the concerns that I indicated on this previous slide, how do these issues pertain to your particular company? Now, maybe some of them are not relevant to your company, maybe some are particularly relevant. Considering the applicability of best practices to your company. And I think above all, recognizing there are some societal issues here that working from anywhere does not work for certain jobs. Maybe for certain parts of the country, working from anywhere will be less prevalent than it will be in perhaps some of the big cities on the East Coast or the West Coast. Different relevance for different countries, depending on the nature of work. But I hope you will consider these takeaways. And I'd like to turn it over now to Scott, who will manage the Q&A.
Thank you, Anne. There's so much great information, so much great data, and a lot of great questions have come in. So let's get to that. I'd like to start with a question from Vladimir. And he mentioned it on slide 12 when you showed the different preferences among the generations. That can you share if these preferences will shift over time? For example, will millennials start valuing remote work less as they enter their prime earning years and become more like a boomer?
So I don't think that millennials are going to change and become like baby boomers. I think it's a reflection of the time period during which baby boomers grew up, entered the labor force, where working from home was considered a stigma. And I think the perception today is that working from home works. We found that we did this major experiment. We found that it works. And I think, baby boomers who perhaps felt that people who were working from home were taking it easy, were shirking from home as opposed to working from home. I think that view is long gone. I think what we saw on that slide in terms of the millennials, in terms of Gen Y, that's the future.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I agree. All right, next questions come from Jorge. He says, remote work is a great benefit to people and they feel they work in a more efficient way. And this was something I was thinking about during your presentation too. So I'm glad he asked it. But do you have any data on the additional hours they feel they work per week pre-COVID versus COVID and what the impact has had? In other words, I've heard a lot of people saying, I feel like I'm always on because my office is in my home and I don't have that delineation anymore. So is there any data on how people are feeling about that?
Yes, there was a research study that was done. I don't actually have it at my fingertips right now, but they did document that people working from home were working longer hours per day. I forget the exact number, but the answer was definitely yes, working more hours per day. People.
Right. I think, that goes to the question of, there's a lot of data on, are you more efficient? And people by and large are feeling they are and feeling that they're, or at least equally to what they were doing before. Do you know if there's any, another question came in about the mental health aspect of it, and the positive, or the negative of mental health of working from home, not having to deal with the life things of commutes and getting home and all those, but also the other side of it, which is you're more isolated. So I wonder if there's any data that you could speak to on that.
So basically what I've seen is that the impact on mental health tends to be somewhat negative, that people miss the socialization, they miss the social interaction. And what many large companies I know are doing are trying to offer wellness benefits so people can reach out to therapists, to set up appointments. So I think I know the large companies are very concerned about this and are trying to increase the pool of employee benefits to mitigate any mental health, any negative mental health impacts.
Absolutely. Great. All right. One question came in from Steve, and this is sort of following that theme. He said, is there research on the role of remote working on company culture, which is, I think it's very important to a lot of people nowadays. How does a company create a cohesive culture in the company, in divisions, in teams with employees working from home?
So I think it's a challenge, but I think it's something that companies are recognizing they need to focus on. It starts from the very beginning when you begin the onboarding process, making sure that the new employee is integrated into the culture, someone who's never worked inside in person in the company, unlike people who work for years inside the company, now spent 1 year outside. I think you need to start with the onboarding process of interacting with people at different levels, getting exposure to the company culture. And it requires managers constantly monitoring this, constantly reaching out, especially to the new employees, to make sure they feel welcome, they understand the culture, they are committed to it, and they are engaged.
Now it's interesting. I think you must see my next question because it came from Eric. Eric Jan said, how is it impacting new hires? Because people are hiring people they've never met. They're hiring people. I was in a program a couple of weeks ago where one of the participants said, I've actually never stepped foot on company grounds. We met people remotely. I don't even know how tall everybody is. It's kind of a funny, but the reality is that she did feel a little disconnected in that way. She did feel that it was a little more difficult to create that. So are you seeing more managers, leadership responding to that overall, like responding to the need for different types of team building that just don't happen when you're working remotely?
Absolutely. I know what many senior managers are trying to do, or managers of remote teams, try to find a time when the team can gather outdoors, face to face, but outdoors in a safe way, take a walk together, just get to know each other in a safe way. I think that's very important. So to the extent that there's some people in the remote team are actually in the same city and could physically get together, companies are experimenting with that. And I think it really helps a lot to see, gee, now I know what you actually look like. As opposed to just being a face on the screen, I actually kind of see you, we walk together, so I think that's very important. Now, it doesn't work if somebody's in Europe and somebody's in Japan and somebody's in the United States. We can't go for a walk together. We could do a virtual walk together, but we can't do that face to face. So I think it's also important if it needs to be the virtual walk together, just to do something fun, like
Right.
a cocktail party, a
Right.
virtual cocktail party. Let's do something fun together, just hang out, the group of us, as opposed to talking about work. Let's do something fun. So I think it's the burden's on managers to really recognize when their reports need that.
Right. Well, I would venture to say that the reality of how that's done is different across the generations too. That the different generations would have different realities of what would work for them, and you have to, as a manager. And I would say, there's a question that came in, one of the first questions that came in from Paul saying, how do you balance as a manager the people who do want to come back and people who don't want to come back? Like when what's fair and what's not fair? Have there been any studies to say okay, half my team truly doesn't want to come back, half my team truly does. How do I figure that out?
So companies are just struggling with that now. There's some people doing a job who really want to work from anywhere, work from home, and there are others who want to come back at least several days a week. How do you make sure, especially in terms of performance evaluation, how do you make sure that that process is fair across the two types of employees? Because you could say, well, the person who's in person sees the supervisor on a regular basis has an advantage, can bond with that supervisor. It's the responsibility of the supervisor or senior manager to make sure that the person who opted to work from anywhere, perhaps for personal reasons, is being fairly evaluated, not treated differently than the person who's operating in person. But there's no easy answer. I think all I can say is companies are well aware of this, and as they plan now for their employees to come back in the fall, they're thinking about this.
Absolutely. And I read an article this weekend, I don't know if you saw it, about the companies that are asking people, it was in the New York area, to come back. in industries where the compensation model is based on being in New York City, being a person who works and lives in New York City. And if you're suddenly not living in New York City, is the compensation model going to change? For those people that decide to commute, to live in a city that is higher priced, that's the benefit of working in that company may have been the compensation model, right? But are you going to have to adjust that based on if you give somebody the flexibility to live in, another part of the country that is less expensive?
Yeah, I think you will. And I think that one of the slides I shared showed that people will be willing to accept a salary reduction in order to have the benefit of working from home.
Yeah. So we're just going to go a couple minutes over because there's so many questions. You and I could talk about this all day. It is a topic that is on the minds of many. So if you don't mind, I'd like maybe 5 more minutes.
Sure.
This question came in. Is there research regarding the impact of work from home on staffing? In other words, is it possible that there will be new obsolete positions and titles within a company? Are we seeing that happen too, where jobs are being taken away or changes in staffing?
So I think it's certainly on the horizon. We haven't seen the full impact yet, but it kind of makes sense when you begin to realize that some of the in-person jobs were really not needed, and many of the tasks can be offloaded to other people who are working remotely. So I think we are going to see that.
Yeah, I think so too. Kristen is saying, how can we use flex time to retain people? I don't know. I wonder if she means, are we hiring people within the time frame of a 9 to 5 time frame, 9 to 5-ish time frame, or are you having a flexible time where work is being doing 24/7, depending on where your location is?
So she might mean that, or she might, or does the question mean, how does having a flexible work arrangement enable you to attract talent?
Yeah, the incentive for that. Yeah, the incentive. The whole realm of flexible work time. How is that used as an incentive these days?
So I think it is. I think, we're seeing, especially among the young employees, that, and especially with the shortage of workers that we're seeing today, with so many companies struggling to attract and retain talent, I think the company that figures out how to package the rewards in a way that it's attractive to the new employees, to the young employees, will the ones who will attract and retain the talent. What the surveys show is people want flexibility. And flexibility means I don't have the supervisor hanging over me, watching me do my job. Now tell me what you want me to work on. I'll work on it. I'll do the report. I'll do the evaluation. I'll bring you the results. Flexibility means I can do that from anywhere. I can do that 2 in.the morning if I want.
Right.
And I think it's the shortage of workers. This is a hot topic in the newspapers, that we don't have enough people who want to work. I think this puts the burden on companies, but also creates an opportunity to craft a package of benefits and rewards that people want to find attractive.
And that are very different than 10 years ago.
Exactly. It's a whole new way of thinking about work.
Whole new way of thinking about work. And I want to ask one last question, but I wonder if this will affect not only getting people in the company, but then people's staying with the company. You know what I mean? Like if you have the flex, it's so flexible to move from company to company. That's, I think, the next challenge too, is, if I don't have to move somewhere, if I don't have to kind of like put my life down somewhere for a company, will I stay with that company?
That's right.
So yeah. It's what do we call it? The wild, wild west right now. There's a lot of questions going on, and there's, a lot to be answered. So thanks so much for this. I just want to end, as I always do, to keep the energy of this webinar going, to keep the energy of all this great information going. For all those HR leaders, for all those leaders out there in the companies who are dealing with this, what should they do today? What's the next thing they should think about? What can they sit down to do and keep the energy going?
So I think for HR leaders, they need to kind of take the pulse of their employees and really try to understand what their employees want. Think about, are there people they're trying to attract to the organization who maybe they haven't, the traditional package is not going to work, throwing money at them is not going to work. Understanding what is it that, especially the young employees, what are they looking for? I think this whole notion of belonging fitting in is very important, and flexibility. So it's not necessarily give me more money, but it could mean give me the opportunity to design how I want to work. And I think companies need to be much more open-minded about that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Anne. It's great to see you. We've worked together
Thanks, Scott.
many years, and it's always a pleasure. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. On behalf of Columbia Business School Executive Education, Professor Anne Bartel, and myself, we wish you a safe, healthy day. Thank you.